Hi, thanks for joining us on this exploration of how to 10x your Java from development to production with VS Code, Copilot, Azure Spring Apps, and maybe a few other things that we're going to throw in just for good measure. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal cloud advocate of Java and JVM languages with Microsoft. If you think of questions, comments, or feedback after the fact, please do reach out to me via email or on Twitter/X at @mkheck. So a bit about me. I am an architect and developer by background. I'm also an advocate, obviously, which lets me combine two of the things that I love to do most, which are code and talk. So thanks for joining me for both today. I have authored several books, but particularly this one, Spring Boot Up and Running, which is a way of helping get folks into the cloud with cloud-native architectures, cloud-native applications using Java and Kotlin. A bit about me: I am a Java champion, Java 1 rockstar, groundbreaker ambassador, Kotlin developer expert, and a licensed instrument-rated pilot, which I will be referring to just briefly here as we go along. So as developers, what is our ultimate objective? And I look at this kind of as a primary and a secondary type of classification. Primarily, we want to get the most and best functionality to production in the least time and with the least pain possible. We also want to secondarily keep it running, keep it in production at optimal levels for best service and best cost. And I guess the first question is, why are these things important? Why would we be concerned about cost? Aren't we just concerned about code? And the ultimate answer to that is because we want to serve the needs of our customers and our community. And we only do that by developing really fit-to-purpose applications and getting them deployed, because we can develop the best application or applications in the world, and until they go to production, until they're in the hands of the folks who need them, they're little more than an academic exercise. And we also can't keep them in service and running and available to our community and our customers unless we make them available in a very scalable, resilient manner and in a very cost-effective manner, so it makes sense for everyone for those applications to be fielded and remain fielded and available to our users. Now, this doesn't necessarily, just by kind of condensing this into a couple points, doesn't ignore the right functionality part and other things like that. So stay tuned. I'll get to that in a moment. So what's the plan? Well, today I would like to kind of focus on a few key elements. We can discuss a lot of things regarding Java development and deployment, but I'm going to try to focus on a few in particular. We're going to optimize for results and discuss kind of how we do that. And ultimately, we want to optimize for flow, the entire flow, because that will obviously involve optimizing certain elements, but we don't want to optimize one element in the entire flow of things at the expense or to the detriment of another. We don't want a net negative, I guess, is the ultimate objective here. We want to make sure that when we optimize with a holistic view in mind, end to end. I love this quote by Peter Drucker. I think he was a management expert, management consultant several years ago, who said, "Efficiency is doing things right. Effectiveness is doing the right things." And at that point in time, there was a kind of an efficiency focus, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is if you're focusing on doing the wrong things really well, right? We don't want to do that. We also don't want to just do the right things and do them poorly. I think by now we can surely focus on both. We can and should do better. So we should be able to do the right things and to do them right or correctly and optimally. So in order to optimize the right things, we want to focus, again, on a few particular things. First, faster and better development. And I start with the environment. And by environment, I don't just mean an integrated development environment or IDE, although that is very important, and I will be covering that to some great extent here today. But we also want to consider things that feed into the overall development environment, like frameworks and libraries and the entire tool chain, if you will, which feeds quite naturally into the next couple of things, coding and testing. We want to incorporate the latest and greatest and most robust capabilities that we can possibly use and provide. We also want to incorporate things like AI, artificial intelligence, to help make our flow more optimal as developers, even in just the development process. And then, of course, we want to streamline deployments, because once we've got this wonderful application developed or applications developed, we want to be able to easily deploy those applications to a platform. And of course, The best thing, the optimal idea behind that is to simplify the platform, not to dumb it down, certainly not, but to make it work for you. Because for a number of years, it feels like, in many cases, developers have been working at the behest of the platform and not the other way around. So let's flip the script a bit. With regard to optimizing the flow, dev tools should facilitate the entire process. So again, that comes into looking at things holistically. If we optimize for a particular thing and it makes things harder downstream, that's probably not a good thing to do. We should also, once we have facilitated that entire process, smooth that process of development. We should also smooth the on-ramp onto the platform. The ultimate objective really is to make everything, start to finish, seamless, make it a light lift, and focus on the developer first, so that we optimize the developer workflow and the deployment workflow to make things as simple as possible, but certainly no simpler. Now, there are a lot of things we can focus on today, again, but with the limited time we have, I'm going to choose a few key parts with the greatest returns, and we're going to cover those next. I'm going to start with VS Code. Visual Studio Code is an editor, an IDE. There are a lot of ways to describe it, I think, depending on how you have traditionally used it. If you have used it, if you haven't, it's high time. But with VS Code, you have the ability to run a world-class integrated development environment across pretty much any platform you can imagine, right? So I run VS Code on Linux, on Mac OS, on Windows, and it's equally comfortable across all three different platforms. It also supports multiple languages. So as you might imagine for a Java talk, it supports Java really, really well, but it also supports a lot of other languages too. So if you have multiple teams within your organization, or maybe you just work in multiple languages, you'll find that between the core functionality of VS Code and the plugins that are supplied by a variety of players within the industry, that you are well covered with regard to your language of choice, or your target language at that point in time. There are excellent Java and Spring Boot plugins, and I haven't really covered much about Spring Boot yet, but Spring Boot is based on the Spring framework, which accounts for roughly 70% of all Java applications fielded currently. So it's quite significant, it's widespread, and of course the plugin support, the plugin game for Spring Boot, as you might imagine, is quite good. By the way, those plugins are developed and deployed and supported by players like Microsoft, but also other industry players, other organizations, and individuals throughout the entire community. So it's got widespread support and excellent support across the board. There are also phenomenal AI plugins. So if you're thinking about an artificial intelligence assistant, coding assistant, there is just excellent support within VS Code for that. I will mention Copilot, especially coming up here shortly, and cover that to greater extent. But to get started, go to code.visualstudio.com, download it, and start kicking the tires on it. You'll be glad you did. GitHub Copilot is the pioneering coding assistant, and it's arguably the best in the industry at this point. And GitHub Copilot allows you to do several things. As a licensed pilot, I like to think, I love the naming of it, because I talk to a lot of developers, as you might imagine, and developers seem like they're very excited or very concerned about coding assistants. And Copilot is not there to shove you out of the way and take the controls, right? Because just like on a flight deck, you have a captain and a first officer, pilot and co-pilot in the former parlance, but it still kind of works. And the co-pilot is there to support the primary pilot, the pilot in command, to help with workload management, to kind of be in sync and offload some of the vast amount of things that have to happen in a short amount of time often. And Copilot is there to support you in your workflow and make your life easier and make you more productive and better. Copilot is a huge force multiplier for us as developers. So I like to think of Copilot as having basically three different modes of operation. And this isn't anything formal, it's just kind of how I think about it in my mind. So Copilot can read my comments. If I start in with a Java class and I start to create a method, or I want to create a method, and I type out a comment to do something, Copilot will read my comment, build the context around that, examine the context around that, and say, here's what I think you are wanting in terms of a method. And that works reasonably well, depending on how much information you put in your comment. If you have a very terse comment with a very nondescript class name, it may not do as well as if you have something very descriptive and you provide some good material to base it on in your comment. That works really well, and you'll see that as we go along. The next mode is what I call read my mind, or sometimes code with me, because what I typically do and what works best for my particular flow, your mileage may vary, but my particular flow is to kind of start coding. And when you start coding and you start with the method signature, then Copilot, again, based on that context and your other repos and code, it can sometimes determine very, very well, eerily well, what you're going to be typing next. And it anticipates that and provides that, so you can just hit tab and accept that. Or sometimes there are multiple options you can click through and choose what matches best, depending on the complexity of the particular problem you're trying to solve with that particular method. Then there's Copilot Chat, which is what I like to call chat with me, because that is a way for you to have a conversation with the AI and say, will you write a method to do this? Well, that's pretty close, but change this to that, and maybe feed this directly to this other method without an intermediate variable or something like that. And it keeps the context throughout multiple interactions, which is a particularly powerful thing. And I'll show you that as we go as well. To get started, and by the way, all of those are one in a way. If you subscribe to, or your organization subscribes to GitHub Copilot, you have access to all of those. It's not like an either or exclusive thing. So go to github.com features Copilot and check it out. I will say that all of these things are available in Visual Studio Code, VS Code now. And of course, in AI, it's a very dynamic and quickly changing area. So, just if resources and staffing were no problem at all and unlimited, probably they would be available immediately on every IDE at the same time as soon as a new feature rolled out. But of course, these things take time. So VS Code always gets everything first. That's another reason why you really want to get involved with VS Code, because you get access to the nightly builds even if you want, and get the latest, greatest as soon as it's available, which is pretty nice as well. Finally, when it's time to deploy, you want a very simple, straightforward, easy way to get your application into production, and to get it into production with style. So again, I mentioned Spring Framework and Spring Boot. These are in use with approximately 70+% of all enterprise Java applications. So it makes sense that you're going to want something that makes your Spring Boot and Java applications super simple to deploy, ultimately configurable, etc. And Azure Spring Apps checks that box brilliantly. So it's what I call a natural and intelligent platform evolution for developers, because as developers, some time ago, we actually kind of had to build it all, and build it all from tiny little sticks, it felt like at times, to build from the very smallest components all the way up to something that resembled a production platform. And then we started seeing coming onto the scene PaaSes, the platforms as a service. And those were really nice in a lot of ways, but at times they weren't always the most flexible and configurable of the options available to us. And then we kind of saw maybe a shift back to more of what I call an IKEA model, a component model that allows you to kind of build maybe larger components and pull them together, but still requires a lot of care and feeding from a developer perspective. And now you're seeing, with things like Azure Spring Apps in particular, a developer-first platform. And the idea is to leverage the dominant framework for Java, Spring, and to make it super easy to deploy, manage, monitor, and scale your applications. Because again, once you get them to production, you need to keep them there in a cost-efficient and resilient and robust manner, make them globally available if need be, integrate with world-class backing services, databases, messaging queues, etc., and to do so securely at planetary scale. And this is what Azure Spring Apps allows you to do. And by the way, there are levels all the way from a consumption plan, which scales to zero and literally is super reasonable from a cost perspective for developers, all the way up to fully enterprise supported across the board, soup to nuts, with support provided by the Spring team as well as Microsoft, to make sure that your globally available application that has to scale to crazy lengths will do just that and perform every day of the year. So you have a lot of different on-ramps and off-ramps available to you as a developer that you get to choose. So if you want to know more, and I'm sure you do, check out aka.ms/Azure Spring Apps. With that, let's go right into the demo. I'm going to stop sharing the slides now, and we'll go live on the screen. We start here with developing an application, and I'm going to keep things fairly simple and straightforward and middle of the road so I can cover the things that I particularly want to cover and not get bogged down in kind of the offshoots here. But we're going to start with the Spring Initializer, which is a way to quickly spin up your project and get rolling with it, and again, with a minimum of muss and fuss. So I'm going to use Maven and Java and the current version of Spring Boot, and we'll change just a couple of the parameters here because why not? We can. I'm going to call this Ignite 10x, and this will be our demo, and we'll use this standard stuff. Jar packaging, we'll use standard Java 17. We can go back or forward, but we won't. We'll just stay here. And I'm going to build a web API, so bring in the Spring Web dependency. I'm also going to include Spring Boot Actuator, which supports, as it says, built-in or custom endpoints that let you monitor and manage your application. It integrates really well with Azure Spring Apps. I'm also going to use JPA, the Java Persistence API, and H2, which is an in-memory database. By the way, these things with H2, you generally don't use an in-memory database for many things, but it's good for a demo. You can use an in-memory database for caching and things like that, of course. But generally speaking, when we go to production, we're going to be doing something with a robust planetary scale backend like Cosmos DB. Again, just simplifying it for today so we can quickly focus on the things that we really want to focus on. So I'm going to save this. And we'll drop that right on the desktop. That works. And then I will open that. And let's see if I can find that. There we go. And actually, I just want to go here. That'll work fine. So we'll unzip our Ignite 10x. We'll go into Ignite 10x. And then I'm going to open this up in VS Code, as you might imagine. And for whatever reason, it's ignoring my, there we go. Okay, that makes it a little more readable. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up my POM, my project object model file, which is just the build file. And we see that it includes all the dependencies that we requested, right? So that makes perfect sense. I'm going to now go and open my application. Of course, yes, we do want to enable null annotations. We have a couple of vulnerabilities. It's finding those with the H2 database. Again, not a production ready database. That's fine. I'm just not going to work with that right now. So, and for whatever reason, it's just not wanting to do this for me. So I'm going to go and do it by hand. I'm going to open my files. And here's our main application class with the typical, or mostly typical, public static void main Java method that you know kicks off our Java application. Now, this application will run right out of the box. It will run. It really won't do anything yet, though. So let's go ahead and build our application out from that. I'm going to start with our domain, and I'm going to create a new Java class. We'll call this pet, because pets are wonderful things, right? And I'm going to make this a class. I'm going to create a little bit of boilerplate here. And of course, there are multiple ways. You can already see Copilot suggesting that maybe I want 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀 involved in the project, and I really don't. But that's fine. I have used 𝗦𝗲𝗀𝗀 at times in the past, so it's probably seeing that and offering helpfully. But I am going to annotate this as an entity, which means that it will store pets in our data store. And then I'm going to create a method, generated value. I'm going to ask the database to create a value, a key for us, and I'm going to annotate that as an ID field. And then here you can see that Copilot is offering to make an ID field, an ID member variable that's private of type long, which is exactly what JPA would expect, right? And I also want to have maybe another attribute. I don't want name, but it's nice to offer that. I'll change that to type. And then we can see that it's already, Copilot is already saying, look, you're using JPA, you've got this set as an entity, right? And you're going to need to support JPA, I already closed it out, a no args constructor, and that's fine. We're going to use that. Thank you very much, Copilot. We also are going to want a constructor that allows us to specify the type. Remember that we don't need a constructor to specify the ID because it's going to be generated for us by our database, and that's great. So the next thing I'm going to do is create some getters and setters. And in this case, I'll go ahead and flag those to create those, but we don't really want to override our ID, so I'm just going to delete that, and that's fine too. They're more like suggestions, really. And then I'm going to insert our hash code and equals methods, which in Java allows you to compare different objects of the same type, of the same class. And then I want to create a toString method, and that gets it done. Now, this is a lot of boilerplate. There are ways to go about this with records or with 𝗦𝗲𝗀 and things like that. But with JPA, we need to go ahead and specify this, and I think it's kind of helpful to see it as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a pet repository, because now that we have our domain class created, we need some way to interact with our underlying data store, and a repository interface gives us a way to do just that. So I'm going to extend, notice Copilot helpfully suggests to extend the CRUD repository and store objects of type pet with IDs of type long, which is exactly what we need. Now, with Spring Data, and the CRUD repository is defined within Spring Data, if you extend one of the Spring Data's repositories in a Spring Boot app, Spring Boot's auto configuration will create the proxy for you to interact with that data store. No opening, closing, flushing, anything like that. It's all automatically handled for you. Again, giving you that force multiplier for your code, which is super, super nice. The next thing I'm going to do is create a controller class, because we're going to build an API. So I'm going to call this, it's jumping in to Copilot, which is interesting. I must have hit a wrong key. So go to File, let's try this, that controller. Actually, maybe I do. Let's find out. Let's see what we get. This is not terrible. So for some reason, Copilot chat is jumping in to help me out. And it gives us some information here as well. It defines REST endpoints for CRUD operations on pet objects. This looks promising. Why don't we try it? I live dangerously here. So let's insert that into a new file. And chances are we're going to want to call this file pet controller, right? And we're going to save this and place that pet controller under source main Java, the Hecklers, ignite 10x, right? And we'll just drop that there with the others. And then it's going to tell us, if we look here, that really this should have a package name here, right? There we go. So that takes care of that. And let's see if there are any other things, pet get name. So there are some things here that we need to fix, and that's fine. Let's go ahead and clean this up. I'm actually going to get rid of a lot of things because we don't need these for our demo today, but they might be nice at another time. So let's go ahead and create our pet controller. We don't need this. That's field injection. What we will need, though, is a way to inject that via constructor injection. That's just a better way of going about it. And that's something, if you're a Spring Boot developer, you're aware of. If not, that's all right. You'll get there. So let's organize the imports. And let's clean this up just a little bit. So I like to start, and we can close or clear that. I like to start with a standard mapping and do something like, let's start here. Return a greeting. Now, this is what I call the comments, right? So code with comments. Mapping. Hello. Let's just remove that and just go with the standard slash. And that looks pretty good. Hello, Spring Boot on Azure. Not bad. So hello, igniters. And an extra exclamation points to give it extra gravity, right? That's not terrible. So another thing that we might want to do, and you can see that it's telling me we got an import we don't need. So let's remove all unused imports. Let's go ahead and inject a message here. And I like to do this just from the environment so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to bring in a value. And you can see that it's offering something up. I'm going to change this to spring.message. And you can define a default message, something like no message defined. That works. And we're going to assign that value to a field called message. So now if we want to return a message, let's do this, just return a message. So it's offering get mapping message. I like that. And then it's just going to return the message. That's not terrible either. So now if we just kind of code with me, if we do get mapping for pets, get all pets, I don't like to return a list. I like to return an iterable simply because when you go to the pet repository and we do a find all, if you look, it returns an iterable. So let's just go with that. Clean that up a little bit. Again, Copilot Chat did a really nice job, but it's a little off. We can tweak that a bit. And then from here, we can go to pets/ID. And ID is a path variable, which it correctly captured right here. Now, since we're using a REST controller, we don't necessarily need to provide a response entity. It's not a bad thing. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and just try to let Copilot take another run at this. So I'm going to say public pet, get pet by ID. It's using a path variable. This looks pretty good. But here's one interesting thing. When you do a get off of something that may not be there, that's problematic. If you return just the results of find by ID, that will return an optional. So if we change that, then we're back in business. And that's pretty nice. So that works pretty nicely. I'm going to go ahead and just have this remove all unused imports. We have a nice clean application file here, a nice clean class. And that looks okay. Now, this should build us a nice API. However, we don't have any data yet. And this is where we can maybe lean on Copilot Chat to provide us some. So what I like to do is just ask Copilot to create a data loader class to create 3 pets, dog, cat, and Tribble for the Trekkies among us here. So here's an example data loader. That looks like that might work. So let's go ahead and we'll insert that into a new file. And this is acceptable, right? But I think we can optimize this. Again, this is what I keep reminding folks of. Copilot is a Copilot. It's there to assist you and help you. But it's not there to do everything for you. There are many times that you, as a really good developer, will look at things and say, I think I can maybe optimize that a little better. Maybe this is a little more idiomatic. It's more efficient. And that's great. But this gives you a really nice starting point. So I'm going to use that starting point, and we're going to change a couple of things. Let me just save this first. And it's under source main Java, the Heckler's Ignite 10x, and we'll make this into our data loader.java. There we go. Now, I don't need to implement command line runner, and I really don't need the injected repository because I'm just going to use it here. In fact, I can just get rid of that, and we have this works. Notice, though, that it kind of hallucinated a little bit because we have our pet class defined as just a name with a constructor of just a name. But of course, it for whatever reason tried to offer us maybe a little more value for our money there. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove these extra parameters that it helpfully offered that don't necessarily apply in our case. We're going to clean up our imports. And that's not terrible, right? But here's the nice thing about Copilot Chat. If I look at this and I take this and I say, use stream.of to create pets. And we'll see what it comes back with. So here's an example. And stream of, and that's actually pretty nice. Let's grab that. And instead of all these lines, we just shorten that to that. And then, of course, I need to make sure that we have our proper imports. And how does that look? That looks pretty good. So again, it wants to capitalize these for some reason. I don't know. Maybe whatever makes you happy, I guess. I just, let's do that. Okay, so now we should have data. Let's find out. I'm going to switch over here, and we will do a Maven W Spring Boot run, which is just a goal within the plugin, Spring Boot plugin for Maven, that allows us to run things independently and kind of as we go and see where we get. I'm going to use /HTTP to query my endpoint, and we'll see if we get our hello back. Hello, Igniters. Now I'm just going to use the -B for a bare response, and then let's see if we get our message. And we shouldn't have a message, no message defined. That's unfortunate. We'll fix that as well. And then we want to also see our pets. Our pets are there. If we go to pet number 2, we get our cat. And everything works. So that's pretty nice, right? Now, let's go ahead and do a couple of more really cool things. I don't have a lot of time, but I really want to show you a couple of neat capabilities that you have. Just too cool. So you've seen the Copilot chat, and we've developed our basic application here. But let's say that we want to ask Copilot chat to create unit tests for pet controller.java. And we'll give that a try. Now, what I find, and I usually like to do test-first development, most people do, or hopefully most people do, but in many cases, I find it's nice to go ahead and create just a very basic API and then build the test from that, or have Copilot chat build the initial passive tests, and then you can build out from there very easily, and then go ahead and go test first from that point forward. So this is a very rudimentary API that I've created, obviously, and building the test from that, and then going back from the tests first into the code makes a lot of sense. And you can see that it gives you a lot of information about not just the code, but it tells you how to what are the mechanisms within and about the code. So if I look at this, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a file from this, insert it into a new file, and I will save that. And instead of under source main Java, I put it under source test Java. And we'll call this our pet controller tests, I believe. If not, we'll change it. Pet controller tests. There we go. So that looks pretty good. And then we just need to go through and make sure that all of our imports are correct. And that looks, the constructor doesn't match up. So again, we would have to make some small changes to this, as I did in the code before, things like that, etc. I'm not going to go through all of that again because our time is so short, but you can see that it creates all of the important things. It creates a mock MVC, so we can use that to mock our interactions with our model view controller, in this case, our controller. And of course, we use a mock repository bean, so we can provide what we need there. I'm not really sure why it placed that there, but that's probably not important for what we're wanting to do anyway. But it allows us to create and test our interfaces quite nicely. Now, another nice thing, because once you build those tests, you dive back into the code and you kind of create this virtuous cycle. But once you have it done, then how do you get it into production? So create a Terraform script to deploy this application to Azure Spring. And I'm going to say Azure Spring Cloud because that's the name that the Terraform templates use, even though it's referred to typically as Azure Spring Apps. So this gives us a very nice start, rather than try to hunt through and craft this by hand, to a Terraform script. And I'll insert that into a new file. And what I like to do is just save this under source main, and then create a new folder called Terraform. And then we'll just call this our main.tf. And as you can see, it automatically picks it up. If you notice the icon here, it's picked up as a Terraform file. It's fully supported. And this isn't exactly perfect, but it gives us a really good start. It's creating an Azure resource group, an instance of the Azure Spring Apps service, and then it creates an app construct. Bindings if you need them. In our case, we don't typically. I'm going to go over and pull a typical one here. And we'll just paste this in, and I'll show you a little bit more of the details. Because typically what happens once you create the group and the service and the app construct, you create an app deployment. In this case, a Java deployment, Java app deployment. And then you use that to deploy your app into. Now, one nice thing, and but one nice thing about Azure Spring Apps is that you can deploy your Java application, your Spring Boot Java app, as a jar file. You can deploy it as a container. You can build a container around a JVM-based jar or a native image, and you have a lot of options at your disposal to do just that. So once you create the infrastructure using Terraform, it's pretty much just a simple command to AZ Spring app deploy, and you're off to the races. I do want to show you very quickly before we part company a quick look at the resource group, which contains the Azure Spring Apps instance. And then you drill into that, and you see the application or applications you have deployed there. And by the way, you have other things at your disposal, like a configuration server, which allows you to externalize your configuration and apply the same configuration to any instance or every instance of your various different applications. So if you have, in this case, a 10x app, and you have 10 or 100 or 1,000 instances of that, that configuration service will provide the same identical configurations or varying configurations, depending on your requirements, to those instances. You have a service registry, so everything can find each other. You have a lot of different things like service connectors to connect to external services like databases and messaging queues and all kinds of different things. But from here, let's go ahead and quickly take a look at the test endpoint. And we see that we've got our hello, basically, that was defined. If I want to see the message ready for ignition, so I put that in. I'm excited. Hopefully you are too. If we pull up our pets, we see that we have all three, the dog, the cat, and the Tribble. And if we just grab number 3, we get our Tribble. So everything works. And it just makes it super simple as a developer to get it to production, know that you can scale it, it's resilient. If anything happens in one area of the world, that something, an instance collapses, it spins up another and takes its place just like that. And you can go to sleep and rest easy knowing that your customers and community are still able to get to the functionality that they need. So here are some helpful resources. If you'd like to check out the repo, and I hope you will, please go to my GitHub repository under 10x, under my GitHub account, 𝗦𝗽𝗲𝗀𝗃, and check that out. I'll be adding code as I go and think of different ways I can expand that and show more of the capabilities of VS Code, Copilot, and Azure Spring Apps. Check out the book, which has its own account on Twitter/X as well. If you want to know more about building cloud-native applications using Java or Kotlin, using Spring and Spring Boot, and check my account out on Twitter/X. If you want to reach out to me, email works. X is probably better. My DMs are open. Just ping me. We'll have a great conversation. So thanks for coming. Have a great day.